Hello and welcome. I am Scrubberlock and this is American Truck Simulator. We've got the Halloween background because Halloween's in a couple of days from when I'm recording this, although it'll probably come out in mid-November or something. I don't think this changes anything in the game. It's just a background instead of the garage. And what we're going to be doing is playing some American Truck Simulator and doing a rant. I will say ahead of time that I will probably be pausing a little bit to check my notes because there's a bunch of stuff I want to say and I want to make sure I get it all said. And I think this is going to be a two-parter. But before we go, we have been teleported back to Oklahoma City. Actually, I could have picked anywhere, but I put us back to our main garage since that's where we should be starting. It's 11:55 a.m. Saturday. We were teleported back there because there was an update to what they called 1.49 in Steam, but what in-game was called 1.48 point something. This may mean that our mod for real-world companies may not work. Don't know. So there may be some crashing. If it's too much of a problem, I'll stop and re-record, I guess. So I don't know if you're going to be watching this or not, but we'll see. What we have to do is go to the job market and take a new job. So let's take a freight job with our truck, and we're in Oklahoma City, so we will go ahead and start with that. And let's see, there's a frac tank. We've done that before. We got forklifts. We can go to LA, or we can take furniture just a short distance. Let's go to LA. We'll see a bunch of new cities, and we'll get into California. Have we been in California? We have not, so we'll get some stuff in California. Now, the annoying thing about California is you can only go 55 in it, so I try not to drive around California too much, but once we're there, maybe we'll hit some of the cities up in Northern California. Maybe we'll take a swing up the coast of Washington or something like that, and this will get us $61,000 at a rate of 45 bucks a mile, which is not much lower than the highest rate we could get for the quicker job of taking that carrier load. And it seems like we do have BP and Home Depot, so everything looks okay. We're going to be taking a fragile load that is high value, so we got to be careful with this, and I don't want to run into anything. So we have 6 hours to get this job, so that should be pretty good. We'll set our GPS destination. So we do have plenty of time to stop and get gas and that such sort of thing. I always forget to check that, as you saw in the previous one of the previous episodes. And so we're going to load in. It says we're free as the wind because we don't have a load yet. And there's some really nice screenshots of this game. It is actually quite pretty. Oh, and we need to rest already. All right. So how far is this thing? Is this a load that I can pick up? Oh, let's hit this. We can repair our truck in case it needs any repair. It doesn't need much. Go ahead and repair it. We don't need to upgrade it. So we do need to rest, but before we do that, let's see, how far away are we on the trip? If I can get out of this. Okay, it's 47 minutes. We have time. Let's grab it, and then we'll find a place to sleep. In fact, we can come right back here if we have to. The reason I'm not sleeping now is sleeping takes 8 or 10 hours, and then the load will go away. And so we want to pick up our load first, and then we will sleep. We should have a long period of time to get to California, so it shouldn't be too much of a problem to take a nap right after we pick up the load. So we'll do that, and then we will get to our rant, since it's just a quick 45 game minutes to get to this particular job site, so it's not too far. So don't know if I don't know, we have to look at the last episode if I was ready to rest at the end of that episode, or if this has to do with the teleportation. I don't really know. I've not done it enough times to know whether when you teleport to a city it advances time and doesn't rest you, or if it just moves you there without advancing the time. I didn't think to check that before I teleported. I don't know if there's any way to check it, because as soon as you get into the game, when there's been an update, it just immediately cancels whatever trip you were on and teleports you without penalty, and then teleports you to a safe spot, which is what it did there. And I don't know if that was a Western Digital, or not Western Digital, Western Star dealer or a different dealer. Let's check the map. I don't remember where we were there. Is this... I don't know. Or it might just be a repair shop. Um, so yeah, I think this rant that I'm doing is going to be a two-parter. This is related to an earlier rant where I had talked about um, on the D&D Beyond forum, someone was talking about their party. It was a game master talking about his party, and the game master explained that the party only had a bard, it didn't have a cleric, and so quote unquote they had no healer. I guess the player who was playing the bard didn't take healing spells and wasn't doing any healing, or maybe didn't know that they could. And so the game master was saying, I'm giving them a lot of healing potions, but I really don't want to have to do that. And is there some way that I can help these guys without constantly giving them healing potions? And it eventually turned into a conversation about whether the game master should be solving these types of problems for the party, or whether you should just let the players solve the problem themselves. And so what I want to do now is talk about that topic, and I think it's a big enough topic that it could go for multiple parts. I don't know if I'm going to do them in back-to-back episodes, because that could get boring to talk about and maybe to listen to, but I do think I want to discuss it in more than one episode, unless it goes much faster than I anticipated going in this episode. I will point out, if you look down at the bottom, we get experience for every 100 miles we drive that are not attached to a load. It's called free roaming, and you get a little bit of XP. Once you get past 8th or 10th level, it really kind of doesn't matter. But at the lower levels, it can be not. I wouldn't say it would be substantial, but it could be not insignificant, shall we say. But we're here, and then as soon as we get here, we're going to look for a place to rest, and we'll sleep, and that means you're going to be driving in the dark. Yeah, one person said on Steam, and I probably should follow this advice, that when he doesn't have a load, and if it's like 3 in the afternoon or something, he just drives around and finds like gets the credit for visiting various sites and does some sightseeing and takes pictures until he can get it to 10 p.m. or whatever, and then sleep for the 10 hours and get up right at dawn. And he always basically does his loads from dawn till nighttime, because he doesn't like the night driving. And then he, after that, takes another rest. However, in this update, in addition to the Halloween stuff, they've apparently tried improving the skybox. It looks pretty good up there. There's new weather effects. It used to just be rain, but apparently they have lightning, and they've put the moon back into the game. So I think I mentioned this before. They don't have a moon. They have stars that are almost impossible to see, at least on my screen, unless I really raise the gamma. They have stars that are almost impossible to see, but no moon, which makes the night so much darker than it really is. In reality, the night sky is much lighter than they depict here, because there's a lot of reflection of ambient light from cities and towns nearby that will light the sky up. And also, of course, we have the moon, which is usually not new. And sometimes the moon is out during the day, so it's not out at night, but most of the time it's out at night, and we can see it, and it does light up the sky for 8 or 10 hours, and it doesn't happen here. And apparently they did have the moon in the game, but I guess it was always full, and people were complaining that it's always full, and that's unrealistic, so they took it out. And I always thought, well, why can't you just swap it from full to quarter to new to quarter to full? Just, I don't know, every Sunday switch it and just keep track of the Sundays. That would be, I would think that would be realistic enough to satisfy most people. But maybe not. Maybe they suggested it and players were like, no, we don't like that. I don't know. Alright, so now we're going to pick up our fragile load, which is heading us to California. And will make us 60,000 bucks, which is pretty good. So we're heading around the corner here, it looks like. Wow, look at that's a triple load there. That would have been fun to drive. I would not have minded driving that a long distance. Guys, I've got a phone call. I've got to pause it here. Yeah, it's just spam. So we get right back onto this. And where are we going here? Let's see. Let me pull out and take a look. Okay, so we are going to need to turn around. Let's go down. And I'll turn around down here. Because it looks like there's some room down here to swing. And so we're just already going to start off a little bit challenging trying to pull this around to the front, but it should be alright. I do say I like the detail in this game. I like how, you know, they've got dumpsters, and there's even a guy cleaning up back there and everything. They did a pretty nice job on the detail. This should get us in there. I used to be so much worse at backing up. If you think I'm bad now, which you might, and I wouldn't blame you, man, you should have seen what I was like when I used to play Euro Truck. I was so much worse. And there we go. We've got it. We're going to shift back to forward, and here we go. So, what I want to talk about is the GM. Let me just pause just for a sec here to take a look at my notes. Who solves the problem of the encounter? Is it the GM's job or the player's job to solve the problem of whatever the encounter, whatever the encounter happens to be, right? Whether it's a group of goblins trying to ambush you as you come past their lair, or whether it's a poison needle trap on a trapped treasure chest, or whether it's convincing the town's nobles to support and fund your party's expedition, or whether it's negotiating the surrender of an enemy troop. Whatever the challenge happens to be, right? The question is, who is the person, which entity is supposed to be responsible for making the solution happen, right? Who's supposed to come up with the answer to whatever the problem is? Is it the game master, or is it the players, right? And in this thread about the healing and the fact that they didn't have any healing, what a number of people argued was, it's not the game master's job to solve the player's problem that they don't have any healers, right? It's the player's job to solve that problem. And as a consequence, the GM doesn't have to figure out what to do if the players don't have a healer. That's what the players are supposed to figure out. The GM's job is to make the encounters. And if the encounters do damage to the players, oh well, then the players will figure out how to heal that damage. That's their job, right? The GM's job is to put the challenge in front of you. Your job is to surmount that challenge, to defeat that challenge. And so in the thread there was a debate, and a lot of people said, no, actually the GM should solve these problems for the player. And so there's sort of two positions. One is that the GM should present the problem and also present the players with the solution so that they don't get stuck or whatever. And the other is that the game master doesn't solve the problem. The game master sets the problem and the players solve it. Now, Luke Hart and Matt Colville, who are sort of famous internet game masters, their position on this is that it is the game master's job to set the challenge and the player's job to solve it, right? Both Matt... What? You can turn right on red. What the heck? I don't know. Both Matt Colville and Luke Hart talk about this. So Colville said, you know, it isn't my job to solve the problems It's my job to set the challenges and the problems, and it's the player's job to solve them. Okay? And similarly, Luke Hart said, I don't solve the problems for the players. I just set the problems. Okay, let's go ahead and rest here. And it's not letting me. All right, let me disconnect. So both of them feel that it is not their job to solve the problem as the game master, that it's their job to set the problem, and it's the player's job to solve it. Again, there were people on the D&D Beyond forum who were saying that no, it's actually the GM's job to solve the problem. You set the problem, you have to solve it. Where do I come down? Well, as with many things, I come down kind of in the middle on this. I think that, should I get gas here? I think I should, actually. Before I pick this load back up, I'm going to get gas. I think that there's sort of two answers here, right? I think that, yes, the player should solve the problem, but as a game master... Sorry, guys, I'm looking for where the gas is. I think I saw it over here. Yeah, it's here. So we'll just spin around. I feel like as a game master, yes, it's my job to set the challenge, and it's the player's jobs to solve the problem. I definitely think that's true, and I agree with Matt Cole about that. However, when I create the problem or the challenge, I also think it makes sense for me as the game master to attempt to come up with at least one potential solution. What I don't want to do is accidentally and without meaning to set a challenge that isn't solvable because I didn't think to try and solve it and see if I could, right? So if I set a riddle or something or a puzzle, I make sure I know what the answer is and how to solve it, at least my way. Right now, the players may come up with a different solution, and my group often did, but I want to make sure that at least there's some kind of a solution here that I know will work, so that I don't accidentally get them stuck into an unsolvable puzzle or unbeatable challenge. Right? It's not my plan to make the challenge unbeatable. It's my plan to make it fun. And so to be fun, we're going to talk about this in the next episode, it has to be possible for them to succeed at it. Right? But so the only way I can be sure it's possible for them to succeed is if I come up with at least one solution. So what I try to do is come up with at least one possible solution so that I know for sure that it can be solved. And then after that, it's up to them to decide whether they want, what solution they want, and whether it happens to be the one I came up with or not, I don't care. Right? I don't try to force them to come up with the solution I came up with. That doesn't make any sense. But I try to make sure that the solution that I have is one that's workable and that it's possible to solve it. What I don't want to have happen is for me to set up a problem that they can't solve, because that isn't any fun. And most of the time what happens is that the players come up with what I call a solution that is adjacent to mine, right? It'll use some of the same components, but they mix them up in a way I didn't expect, or they throw in a spell that I wouldn't have thrown in, or they fail to throw in the spell I would have thrown in, and it maybe makes it a little harder because they didn't use the spell I was going to use, or I thought they would use, but hey, they figured it out and they solved it anyway, right? What you got to be careful of is to make a challenge that only has one very specific solution, and that if the players don't come up with that solution, they can't solve the challenge. You don't want to do that, because then what you're effectively doing is you're railroading them, right? You're saying there's only one solution, it's the one I came up with. If you don't come up with it, you're wrong, and therefore you can't solve it. And the only way to solve this problem is to cast the spell Zone of Truth. If the cleric doesn't think to prepare that spell, they can't solve it. If they have it prepared but don't think to cast it, they can't solve it. And so that kind of specificity tends to lead to a railroad. And I think this is actually a problem in a lot of published adventures. We've talked about these before in the last couple of episodes and why they're like this, but I think a lot of published adventures, they have solutions that, the person who wrote the adventure came up with. They come up with one solution, and this is where you often find the writing, what should we call it, the writing paradigm of saying, no matter what the players do, this happens. No matter what they do, they'll get arrested and end up in jail. And the reason that writing is there is because the author of the adventure wants to get your characters into the jail so they can run the next scene, which is important for the rest of the adventure. If you're not in jail at that moment, you're not going to witness whatever it is you witness that would have pushed the story into the next scene, and the whole adventure falls apart. And similarly, they often only come up with one solution. The only way to solve this is to get this document and hand it to this guy. And anything else the players try to do will ultimately fail, although they're free to try. No, they're not free to try if everything else they try will ultimately fail. So you want to be careful when you're doing this, not to say, well, this is the solution that I came up with, therefore it's the only one, right? I don't do that. What I do is I come up with a putative solution, right? A potential solution, what's the word for it? I guess putative or potential solution. It's possible to solve it doing this, so I know it's a solvable problem. And if you do that, you'll solve it. But if you don't do it, you might solve it anyway, and it might solve it better. I just made sure there's one way to solve it no matter what else you try. At least this can work. So let me give you an example of a case where there's essentially a fixed solution, kind of a railroad. This is from Blood Drive, so spoilers if you're going to play the game Blood Drive, the adventure Blood Drive. It's from Chapter 2, the Shooting Stars, or whatever it's called. So what happens is the player characters see a rocket go through the sky and crash near the herd, and it scares the herd. So the trail boss tells the player characters to go check it out. And when they go check it out, they find a guy in a Union uniform. So this is, right after the Civil War. So it's a Union Army uniform, dead, shot, and a damaged, also shot up jetpack. Now the player characters don't really know exactly what a jetpack or a rocket pack is, so I described it to them and I said, well, you guys know what it is, but your characters wouldn't, and we had some fun with that. And it says in the book that pretty much as soon as they show up there, within a certain amount of time, the Union soldiers from the nearby fort are going to show up and try to get the rocket pack back. The guy also has some plans for the rocket pack and for some other things on his person that he stole. He was shot coming out of the fort. And so what's supposed to happen is, if the player characters are there, there's ornery Captain Callahan and his 10 soldiers with rifles are going to try to arrest them. If they're not there, if they leave before Captain Callahan gets there, then Captain Callahan's going to show up in the camp the next morning, I think. I don't know for sure because my guys got encountered that night, so I don't remember. But he shows up and he threatens to basically arrest everybody unless these 4 guys come with him. The whole idea is, no matter what happens, whether they get caught at night or caught in the morning, Callahan's going to arrest them. And pretty much the only solution, he takes them in jail, they cool their heels for a couple days, and pretty much the solution is that the owner of the herd is informed by the trail boss what happened, and he goes and gets them out. So I'm reading this going, what's even the point of this encounter, right? Because they're just witnesses to this thing happening. They can't really be permanently jailed. They can't get out themselves. There's no way to talk their way out of the encounter, pretty much. And so that's a railroad, right? John Goff, the guy who wrote Blood Drive, set a scenario, set an encounter up where the only solution is to have the NPC come along and persuade his way into getting them and like trade some cattle to let these guys go free. So I didn't know what was going to happen, but my first thought was, no, I'm going to have the Union show up right there at night and we'll see what they do. So now the Union shows up and one of them decided to hide. And so based on skill checks and skill rolls, she successfully hid behind some tumbleweed or whatever, and they didn't see her. And so they took the rest of the posse in, but not her, and that allowed her to run off and get the owner of the herd much quicker than was anticipated in the book. And meanwhile, the other player characters were stuck in jail, and I played Captain Callahan as being very suspicious and not liking them and so on. And what happened is she just went and got the owner of the herd and brought him back, and they went in to try and negotiate with this guy. Now, he was nearly impossible to negotiate with because the writer of the book didn't expect a player character to be out of jail negotiating. So he set an incredibly hard, nearly impossible challenge. I think my player could have done it because she actually had a card that she was able to play to improve his reaction 1 level, so it got from hostile to unfriendly, which helps a little bit. And then she made her skill check and she rolled a crit fail. So she got captured and the owner of the herd had to let them out. That was me helping them out of that problem, in part because the book had put them into that problem without any solution to get out other than that the owner helps them out. So in a case like that, I am willing to provide the solution for my players because the book really didn't provide any solution other than the NPC gets you out. And when they tried to do their own solution, they crit failed. And if it had been a solution that, if there had been a real solution to that problem and they had screwed it up, I might let it ride. But because there really was no solution to this problem, right? John Goff didn't really come up with a solution. The solution was that the player characters can't get themselves out, and Bill Sutter's going to get them out. That's not a very satisfying setup. And so I let Bill Sutter get them out of it because how else were they supposed to get out? The book really didn't provide them with a solution. On the other hand, I think so what I think is, as a game master, when I set a problem for the players, I come up with a solution that I think they could do. If they choose to, that's fine. If not, at least I know there's one possible solution, but they don't have to use it. However, I think that's for when the game master sets the challenge. I think if the challenge is created by actions the player characters take, and not what the GM set up, then they need to get themselves out of it. So if we think about the party without the healer, the players decided what characters they were going to play, and the player of the bard decided whether to take healing spells or not. If as a party they chose not to make up any characters who heal, and not to have the potential healing character take any healing spells, that's on them. And it is not the GM's job to solve that problem. Right? In Deadlands, I told my players, for example, you're going to be in a rodeo, you're in a roundup, you're going to be in a cattle herd. Your characters are going to have to make riding checks a lot. You don't have to take writing, but your life is going to be a lot harder if you don't. I didn't make them do it, but I let them know that they would benefit from having it. I also pointed out to them, sometimes it's a good idea to have multiple characters who can heal. So they have a Blessed who's like a cleric who has really good healing powers. Great healing powers. He's the only one. I don't think anyone else in the group took the healing skill. And I said to them, anyone can take healing, and if you have a first aid kit or a medical bag, whatever, what is it, doctor's medical bag in Deadlands, which is like a first aid kit, you don't take any penalties, right, against it. Without a kit, there's a -1 penalty. I don't think anybody else has it. I think the Blessed has it, but the Blessed has powers. Doesn't need it. I don't know if anybody else has healing. If they don't have healing, that's on them. I am not going to pull my punches because only the Blessed has healing. And if the Blessed goes down, I'm not going to pull my punches because there's nobody to heal him. They chose that, right? This is Savage Worlds. It's open character design. Anybody who wants to can spend a skill point or two on healing. You chose not to do it. That's on you. It is not my job to solve the problems, in particular, that the players set for themselves. So if we go back to this D&D group, they chose not to play any clerics, not to play any druids, and the player who's playing the bard, who is a perfectly serviceable healer, chose apparently not to take healing spells. At that point, it is not my... I am not, as a game master, going to give you healing potions to correct for the fact that you voluntarily chose not to take any healing with your party. You guys chose to do that. That's just the... I guess you don't want some healing. That's fine. You don't have to have it, but don't expect me to cover your butt, right? Helping the players solve a problem that you set for them that may be hard for them to figure out or harder than you anticipated, which, again, we're going to talk about that, I think, a little more in the next episode. I have no problem with that because, you know, sometimes they do need a little help and I'm the one who set the challenge. But if they do it for themselves, right? So if we go back to the Deadlands example, if the player characters had, like, one of them's got a martial arts, if he said, I'm going to try to use my martial arts to, like, break out of the jail, and then breaks them all out, and excuse me, now they're like in a U.S. Army fort, taking out soldiers and sneaking out. Okay, those guys would be wanted by the U.S. Army, and they'd be fugitives from the U.S. government at that point, because that was a problem you generated by breaking out of prison. Now you could say maybe he didn't know there was any other option. All of the characters knew in character that the one girl had not been captured. And in fact, her horse was with them. And they lied to the army and told the army that it was a pack animal and that they had brought it along as a pack animal, which convinced the soldier that that horse was... They convinced the captain that that horse was there for the Rocket Man and that they were there to meet him and brought him a horse and to carry the rocket. And so he was sure that they were all in on the theft, which just cemented his belief that these guys are spies for Wasatch Rail. And he grilled them, and we had a lot of fun with that scene. I think that's one of my favorite scenes so far, is when I had him grilling the 3 PCs who were captured. But they knew, their PCs knew that the other girl was not with them, and they assumed she was doing something to get them out, so there was an in-character reason for them to withhold trying to do a prison break. If when 10 U.S. Army soldiers and a U.S. Army captain who was a wild card had showed up in the desert and leveled their rifles at them, the posse had said, we're going to stand and fight, again, they probably could have won that fight, but I wouldn't have protected them, right? I wouldn't have said, I won't do wounds, right? If you start a fight with the U.S. Army and you get shot to death, I don't care. Like, that's on you. You made that problem, right? So I think as a game master, If the player makes the problem, I don't try to think of a solution out, and I pulled no punches. You made this problem, you can solve it. And as a GM, if I create the problem, the circumstance, I will try to come up with at least one solution to get out of it so that I know it's solvable. But I don't consider it my job to tell them what the solution is. Right? If they ask me, is there a solution to this, I would say probably yes. But I'm not going to tell them what it is, because that's not them playing the game, that's me playing the game. Like, it's no challenge, really, for me to solve my own problem. The challenge is for me to set the problem and for them to solve it so that we have a game. Right? That's what makes it an interesting game. So, I won't tell them what the solution is, but I will tell them if they ask me, is there a solution to this? I would say, yes, there is one. I'm not going to necessarily tell them what it is. I probably won't tell them what it is. But I would be willing to say, yes, there is a solution to this. Or, is there a non-violent solution to this, GM? We're not going to ask you. My group would probably say, we're not going to ask you what this is, but we just want to know, is there a non-violent solution? And I'll say, yes, there's at least one that I have thought of, and there might be more that you may have thought of that I haven't. So, the idea is to provide them with a challenge, and instead of solving it for them, come up with at least one solution that could potentially work, and then let them come up with their own solution, and maybe it's the one that you came up with, and maybe it's a different one. That's okay. You shouldn't set it up so that there's, like in this blood drive situation, there's only one solution, and no matter what the players do, that's all the solution there is. And if you do that, that's railroading, right? That's taking away their agency. It's not allowing them to enjoy taking their own actions and then seeing what the consequences of those actions might be. Right? So a great example, I'm getting ready in Play by Post to do Harn, to do Savage Worlds in Harn, the Harn world setting. And one of the idiosyncrasies of that world, because it's sort of based on real medieval, authentic Britain, is that there are rules, chivalry rules, or whatever you want to call it, about who can carry what kinds of weapons. And so only nobles who are knights and stuff can carry what are called chivalric weapons. These are heavy armor, like plate armor, the large shields, and things like broadswords and things like that. So these are chivalric weapons, and commoners, whether serfs or freedmen, are not allowed to use them. And you can get into a lot of trouble for it. So let us say that I give the party a really good magic sword, but none of them are nobles, so they're technically not allowed to carry it legally, and they say, we're going to keep this thing because we like this magic weapon. And now they come into a city where if they're seen walking around with this thing, they could get into trouble because they're not allowed to bear chivalric arms when they're not knights and nobles. And so that is a problem for them to solve. I'm not going to figure out how to solve that. If they want to keep the sword and not go to jail for it or get hung for it or whatever, and they still want to keep it, they don't want to get into trouble for it, but they know that if they get caught, they will get into trouble. That is a problem for them to solve. I'm not going to solve it for them. That's the challenge, right? Part of the challenge of this particular moment is that you have to get this magic sword through the town guard without being arrested for trying to, what would the term be? Trying to bear arms above your station, right? Because this is seen as an act of insurrection. There is an order to society with the nobles on top, and then the freedmen, and then the serfs. And the serfs they're not allowed to bear any weapons at all. They're only allowed to carry tools. So the weapons they're allowed to carry are things that are tools that could be used as an improvised weapon, like a hatchet could be used as a weapon, or a staff that you walk with could be used as a weapon, or a sickle or a scythe, which are tools that you use for farming, could be used as a weapon. those are allowed. Clothing, leather, armor, anything that is made from animal hides can be considered clothing. So serfs can only wear cloth or leather armor, or hide armor, right? Light armor. They cannot carry shields. They cannot wear any metal armor, and they can't use either regular or chivalric weapons. So if you're a serf, you can only use like a quarterstaff or a sickle or something, wear leather armor, etc. That is going to be a challenge as a restriction for somebody who actually is a serf but wants to go adventuring, because they're going to need better equipment than that. I'm not going to tell them how to solve the problem. Well, you could solve it by using like some kind of disguise self power if you have it, or you could solve it by doing this or that. I'm not going to tell them how to solve it. That's not my job. My job is to tell you, here's the problem. This is the social rule that you're laboring under, and it's going to make it difficult for your character to walk around this town wearing and bearing the items that you have in your character sheet. You have to figure out how to do it. Maybe you could bribe the town guard. Maybe you could get permission from the king. Maybe you can hide the stuff somewhere and sneak it in. Traveling a little too fast there. I mean, those are all potential possibilities. I'm not going to tell you what to do. That's your job. You need to solve this challenge. Think about like The Hobbit, for example. This is a great one. In, spoiler alert, at the end of the book when they're on the Lonely Mountain, right? There's one obvious way in through the main entrance, and the smoke of the dragon is pouring out of it, and Smaug is in there up the hallway of the main entrance, lying on a giant pile of all his treasure. And they want to go in there and get some of the treasure, and they actually want to go in there and get the monster out of there. So what do? They don't walk up the front entrance, right? The GM sets the problem, but he gives them a hint. He gives them a treasure map, and the map to the Lonely Mountain indicates there's a secret door on the other side of the mountain. He doesn't tell them you have to go in that way. They could go in the front way. But they would need somebody who could slay the dragon, and they don't have anybody who can slay the dragon. So what do the players do? They talk about it and they go, we're not going to go in the front door, let's go in the side door. So they go in the side door, and, well, the side door is magical. It's small, so Smaug doesn't know about it, but it's magical. And it only opens at a certain time of day, and it only opens if you have a certain key. So all of these clues were given to them, and they decide to go to this secret door and try to figure their way out and figure their way in, I guess, sneaking in. And so they open the door, and then they say, okay, we're going to have the thief, the burglar, right, Bilbo Baggins, we're going to have the thief sneak into the treasure room and steal us some treasure. And so Bilbo has to solve. So Bilbo's player, unbeknownst to the other players, because he and the GM had a private session with Gollum a couple of sessions ago. The other players don't know what happened. Bilbo's player's like, okay, and he sneaks and he passes a note to the GM, so I'm going to put on my ring of invisibility. The GM says, okay, everybody leave the room. I'm going to have a session with Bilbo. And he runs the session with Bilbo where Bilbo is bantering with Smaug. He is having like a debate with the dragon, and he's got to make some persuade rolls and some sneak checks and things like that. That's a challenge for Bilbo's player. Bilbo's player could have picked up the treasure and run away, but he chose to stay and banter with the dragon, and he gave the dragon a whole bunch of clues so that the dragon realizes that they came through Dale. And so after Bilbo steals the treasure and Smaug gets angry about it, he decides that Smaug will intuit where the secret door is based on what Bilbo was doing, and that the men of Dale helped them. And Smaug sails out of the entrance of the dragon, entrance of the cave, and the first thing he does, he tries to burn the entrance to the secret door. That's another problem. So the players of the dwarves and Bilbo go, okay, how do we solve this? Let's run inside and shut the secret door from the outside so he can't get us. And so they go down the hallway and they shut the secret door. and Smog basically caves in the exit so they can't get out. And now they're trapped in the hallway, and they're just waiting, and they're like, we don't know what to do. Meanwhile, Smog goes to the city, and he gets shot and killed, and they don't realize it. And now they're in there, and after a while, when the dragon doesn't come back out, they say, okay, let's take the treasure over. Then there's another problem. A bunch of armies show up that want part of the treasure. What do we do? And so that's, obviously it's a novel, right? It's not D&D, but that's the spirit of how this works, right? The GM sets the problem. Smog is bathing the mountainside in fire. What do you do? And the players say, we're going to sneak down the secret entrance and shut the door. That's our solution. Right? It doesn't matter if the GM thought of that ahead of time. Maybe the GM expected them to do something else, like run down the side of the mountain. It doesn't matter. They still came up with a viable solution, and GM didn't have to tell them. That's what they came up with. And so, I think that I agree with Matt Colville and Luke Hart that as a whole, it's the GM's job to present the challenge to the players, and it's the player's job to solve that challenge in whatever method, game legal method they choose to do. My only tweak to that is that if it's a challenge I've set for them, I do try to make sure that I come up with at least one solution so that I know it's solvable. Right? I'm looking at the map and the thing with Smog, and I say, okay, well, one way to avoid the fire when he bathes the mountainside in fire and starts caving it in would be to run down the hallway and shut the door behind you. So I don't know if that's what the players are going to do, but I know at least that's one way to solve it. They might try to run down the mountain, and we'll turn that into a dramatic task and, climbing down the mountain. Or they might try to fight the dragon, which is probably going to get them all killed. Or they might try to do this or that or the other thing, right? You could say, well, they might try to do all these other things, but what I at least know is there is at least one way to solve this, and that is to go run inside the cave and shut the door. Right? Run inside the secret cave and shut the door. And so that's kind of how I try to do it. I try to make sure that there's at least one solution that I've thought of. And that's just getting a little photograph there. I try to make sure there's at least one solution that I've thought of so that I know the problem can be solved. You don't have to solve it my way, but I know it can be solved. And so that's what I try to do. Same thing in combat. It's okay, how would I beat this big bad evil guy? I look at the character's abilities and I say, okay, I would, they could use this spell, they could use these abilities. I would probably have the fighter move in here and then use this ability to stop him from teleporting away or what have you. Say, okay, well, I know that at least it's possible given the abilities that I see on the character sheets and the spells and how the spells work. I know it's possible to win this fight. Whether the players are going to win it the way I would, I don't know. But it's possible. This is where in Champions, battle testing, play testing battles comes in. You put the tokens on the board, you run the battle in Champions Combat. This is what I should do. Okay, the heroes won. Now, I don't know if they're going to do any of what I play tested, but at least I know from my play test that it's possible to win. Right? So that I know that no matter what they might do, there is a way to win this fight against these bad guys because I did it. Now, I'm doing it using maybe the perfect strategy against them or whatever. I tried not to do that, right? I don't know their weaknesses as a player, even though I know them as a game master. So, like, usually what I would say is, well, what does Astron usually do here? Well, he mostly either uses his Energy Blasters and RKA. I'll just half the time use Energy Blast and half the time use Rage Killing Attack. What does Assaulter do here? Well, if he's within a half move with Acrobatics, using the old rules, you can't do this anymore. He'll zero phase half move Acrobatic Flip, half move Find Weakness, and if it succeeds, he'll do a punch because he's got Find Weakness with Punch. If it fails, Or if he can't do an acrobatic flip to get close enough, if he's got to do a regular half move, then he'll do a half move kick. Because the kick does more damage than the punch just works better when you find weakness. And if he can't do either of those things because he's too far away, then he'll either move into melee range if it looks reasonable to do, or he'll take his throwing star and he'll throw it. All right, half move and then throw the throwing star. So, yeah, there's only a few things that this character can do that are the obvious. Now, he has all kinds of other abilities, and the player could do other things like a presence attack that are non-standard. But what I would do is I would just use their standard common abilities, their normal bread and butter attack, and just assume they do the bread and butter attack in every phase. Unless there was some particular reason to do something super special or unusual, like Astron pulling out his flash because it's a perfect situation for it or what have you, I would do that. I always used average rolls so that my conclusions weren't relying on having to get real lucky and roll 3 6s on a 3d6 killing attack, because the player might roll triple ones. So I tried not to rely on unusually good or bad rolls and instead took the average. But the reason I did the playtest was to make sure that there was a solution, that it was possible to win this fight. Now maybe the players aren't going to do what I was doing and they don't win the fight. That's okay. I just wanted to know it's possible. Same thing, I want to know it's possible to solve this riddle, to solve this puzzle, to solve this dilemma, to solve this social situation. There's at least something you could say to the sheriff to get him on your side. You might not think of it, but there's something. And if you say it, okay, here's how it could be handled. And so I try to envision some kind of a solution to each scenario that I present so that I know it's solvable, and then I just let the chips fall where they may. Now again, if it's player manufactured, right? If they murder somebody in a modern setting and now they're potential fugitives from the law, I'm not going to help them out with that. You chose to murder this guy. You will suffer the consequences without any assistance from the GM because you're a murderer. But if it's something I manufactured, I try to make sure that at least there's a solution that I can come up with. And if the players are stumped and they ask me for a hint, right? Jordan Caves Callerman in the in the ETU game in Wildcards, he created something called the Clue Token that could be unlocked by donations from the viewers, and it was unlocked almost every session. They had like 45 sessions, and the Clue Token could be used as a table Benny, or the players could turn it in and ask the GM for a clue, and he would have to be truthful about it. And I can only think of 4 times in about 45 sessions where they turned it in and said, "Can we get a clue about this? Because we're really not sure." And so that was the out for Jordan Caves Callerman. That if as a game master you have set too hard of a challenge and the players just don't understand how to solve it, they can ask you for a clue, and you can then tell them, if you've figured out one solution, well, one way to do this would be this. One way to do this would be to prey on this person's fears that they've expressed. Oh, we're almost out of gas. Gosh. Okay. Hang on. Let me... And I'm right at the gas station and I didn't see it. So let me... Is there another gas station? No, we're going to have to go off road over here. And then I think we will stop with this rant, and then we'll pick up with the next rant next time, talking about setting the challenges, right? So the idea is, okay, I've come up with a challenge and a solution. I've come up with like a battle, and I know how you could win the battle. But there's also the idea of calibrating the challenge so that it is solvable. Because you could set unsolvable solutions. For example, you could take a level 1 party and have them go through a dungeon, and the first encounter is an ancient red dragon. And if it's just a bunch of characters in a room with an ancient red dragon, that's not a solvable. So that's not a solvable problem. The players can't kill. At first level, they cannot kill an ancient red dragon. He's going to kill the party in one breath weapon, and it's over. And that's not going to be a lot of fun. So there's also this question of how do you calibrate? How do you decide what's a good a good problem for the players, one that they can solve? So one way I calibrate for non-combat whether it's solvable is just to ask whether I can figure out the solution. You set the puzzle, and then you see, can I figure out the math or whatever it is? Can I figure this out? And if you can, then you're golden, because then they should be with multiple players helping, right? You're one guy, you're one mind, you're one person. So if as a player, if as the creator of the challenge, you manage to figure out how to solve it by yourself, then odds are that the players working together to come up with this will be able to solve it as a group, because there are 3 or 4 or 5 of them, and they're always going to be able to outthink one person, because there are multiple people. Somebody's going to get a better idea than you had. So anyway, that's kind of my take on whether the GM should help the players, should solve the problem for the players. And the answer is generally no. You should make sure that the challenge can be solved, absolutely, by making sure you can solve it yourself. Make sure the challenge can be solved. But there's no reason to tell them the solution or just hand it to them. Instead, what you should do is have one there so that you know it's solvable, present it to the players, and let them solve it. Now, if they get completely stumped and they want some help, that's where you can say, well, I can give you a hint, but you're going to lose some experience points. Or I can give you a hint if you give me a Benny or a clue token. And I can give you a hint, but it's going to cost something. And then let the players decide, do we want to pay that price? And I think that also can be extremely helpful to do it that way rather than to just give them the solution. Because ultimately, guys, if you set up a problem and then you set up the solution and then you give the players the solution, you're the one playing the game, not them. And in particular, you're railroading them, because now you're forcing them to take your solution to your problem. How is that fun, right? This is like you're just soloing the game now, and the players are there to watch. By the way, the really bad GM did this, the bad Rob. He set up the problem. His characters had the solution, the only powers that would work, right? Brainstorm, who was the mental character, the psionic character. She was the only one who could affect this guy because he was immune to everything but psionics. He was playing her as an NPC, and he was playing the bad guy. And so he created the problem, a guy who could only be beaten by psionics. He had the solution, my NPC has psionics. And then we just watched while Brainstorm beat this guy, and we sat there attacking him and doing nothing to him. And he was laughing at us at how powerless we are. And then what we were trying to do was protect Brainstorm from him so that she could beat him. So that was a little bit of the problem for us. But I mean, that's not exciting. And it's very railroady, right? You're playing the game. What do you need us for? You're playing the game by yourself now. So as a game master, what you want to do is provide a challenge that doesn't only have one solution, but one that you came up with that at least could be done so that you know it's doable, and then just let them go and come up with whatever solution they want. And if they don't come up with your solution, not only is that okay, but that's cool. I was just watching the ETU talkback for the final episode in the last season, and they were talking about whether the players surprised the GM. The GM was saying mostly, I kind of know my players, so not really, but it's fun when they do. And what I thought was, not only is it fun, but that's what you're playing as a game master. That's what you're playing for. It's way more fun for me as a game master when the players completely blindside me with a completely unexpected thing that they are going to do to solve this problem rather than what I thought. That's so much fun. Now, yes, you've got to be light on your feet, and you've got to be agile, and you've got to be able to improvise some stuff. And I don't mean improv acting. I mean improvise how you're going to run the game, when the players are doing that. It's a lot easier for them to just follow your railroad. But it's so much fun when the players come up with a wildly out there solution that you never thought of. And you're like, dang, that's brilliant. Okay, this probably will work. Go ahead and make some rolls. It's super fun, and I always enjoy it. So, I highly recommend setting the problem, letting the players come up with a solution, but just make sure that you've got at least one in the can as a possible solution for this. It might not be the best one, but at least it'll work, so that you know it can be solved, and if the players get stuck and they need your help, you can give them a hint. Because it's no fun to just sit there and not know, and be like, we're totally stuck, we have no idea how to solve this problem, let's all just go home. That's not a lot of fun, right? So that's my take on it. And then next time what we'll do is we'll talk about how do you set the problem so that it is solvable. It's just hard enough and not too hard. Until next time, guys, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been American Truck Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper.